Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harvey Mansfield. I have the honor of introducing tonight's speaker. Today, universities are sometimes accused, in my view correctly, of political correctness. Political correctness is in retreat in society outside the universities, but in the universities themselves, it continues with enormous power. What is this thing, political correctness? It's not something which is brand new. I first heard the phrase here at Harvard back in the mid-'80s. And yet it's relatively new. Political correctness doesn't mean having a dominant opinion. Every group, every society has some kind of dominant opinion. The dominant opinion at Harvard now is liberalism. But that isn't what makes Harvard PC. I remember when Harvard was predominantly Republican. So it voted in 1952. The student body of undergraduates voted for President Eisenhower, I remember. No, political correctness doesn't mean having a dominant opinion. What it means is the requirement of sensitivity. You must be sensitive to certain groups, anticipate their objections, share their feelings. It's not a question of answering their arguments, rather of making sure that nobody has to make any arguments. Political correctness is more a matter of good manners than correct opinions. Good manners means sensitive manners, not forcing anyone to state an opinion. The universities today are characterized above all by their blandness. Look at the presidents and the deans. Their mechanical smiles, which in the presence of donors become all-consuming grins. They write soupy prose and they drink tomato juice. And they're non-judgmental. As their highest ideal, they have replaced Plato's idea of the good with Plotkin's idea of the vapid. And what about the professors? Almost totally without character. Obsequious to students, even to parents of students. They're given to grade inflation. Always on their knees they are, trying to be with it and failing pitifully. Professors are insincere because they try to repress their true reactions. Or they're weak because they have no true reactions. In some, they are timid, tolerant, and nice. We need an antidote to this disgusting situation. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School and by the Program on Constitutional Government in the Great Gray Green Government Department. And we set out on a search to find the most insensitive person in America. If not in the world. But the search was over before it started because we always knew that it was Camille Paglia. A woman of character, truthful character, shining character, pungent character. She can smile, and she can bite. She has a few sharp edges. She's a sworn enemy, as I've said before, of the namby-pamby, the hoity-toity, and the artsy-fartsy. Her opinions are convincing because they come with conviction and arguments, and they're appealing because they're nonconformist. Camille Paglia is professor of humanities at the University of Arts in the great city of Philadelphia. She received her bachelor's degree from the State University of New York at Binghamton, and then condescended to take her master's degree and PhD in English from Yale. She's a columnist presently for the internet magazine Salon and the author of 3 wonderful books: Sexual Personae, Art and Decadence from Nefertiti to Emily Dickinson, 1990, Sex, Art, and American Culture, 1992, and Vamps and Tramps, 1994. And her latest book is a study of Alfred Hitchcock's movie, The Birds, which was published last summer by the British Film Institute in its Film Classics series. Her topic tonight is the reform of American education. And ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to give you now Camille Paglia.
Good evening. I'm going to talk to you about my philosophy of educational reform tonight. And this is actually the number one issue of my career. People have sort of focused in obsessively on certain controversial aspects of my feminist philosophy, but overall, I consider it my mission to try to reform both primary and secondary education in the United States. I myself feel I had a superb education in the public schools. And then at the State University of New York at Binghamton, I'm an enormous believer in public education. I think that we've lost the will to keep up the old standards for many reasons in the last 30 years. If I were to say what is the purpose of education, it is to sustain, I think. What is the best sustenance that we can give to students that will be of use to them in the long run, looking at the many phases of their lives? I think of this sustenance as applying not just to the individual, but to the society at large. It certainly should be obvious to all of us that there is a major political crisis in Washington, that there has been a major failure by my generation of the 1960s in governance. Both the Democratic and the Republican parties are in disarray. We should be concerned about what kind of political leaders we're going to have as we move into the millennium. We have to begin, it seems to me, at the very bottom level and really look at the kind of education that's being given. I feel that that too much of contemporary education, about the primary and the secondary level, is shot through with a kind of with negativity, with false and shallow ironies, with paranoia about the past. There has been a falling away of the will to give a basic education to the students. The schools have become instruments of social engineering. There are a million political points to the way curricula are structured at both the primary and the secondary level. Now, I must emphasize that I am coming out of the immigrant experience, and my premises remain that. All four of my grandparents were born in Italy, and so was my mother. Public education was wonderful for us in America, and for a very long time. There was a sense that primary education should be disciplined, should be orderly, should be simple, should unify. And for some reason, again, many of the forces that were unleashed by my generation into the culture have undone that kind of resolution that we had before. Let me tell you a story about my experience last week. I was in New York City, and within the space of 2 hours, I had what I feel were profound artistic experiences by visiting 3 different buildings. The first was Grand Central Station, which has recently been renovated. That magnificent building, with its statues on the front of Mercury, the god of commerce, looking down upon capitalist New York, the building in the great Beaux-Arts style, drawing on elements of Greek and Roman architecture as filtered through French culture. I walked into that interior space, the beautiful gold marble gleaming, the magnificent ceiling restored, the blue sky, and the constellations coming down to us for that map of the heavens from antiquity, from Babylon, and then through Greece and Rome. And I saw all of the elements of Roman engineering, the background of my own people, in the grand arches of the concourse. I thought, this is a magnificent public space, a sense of grandeur and majesty that speaks for the city. And it shows something about New York's reviving itself, that building has been treated with such respect. And then I walked on from there to a few blocks away, St. Patrick's Cathedral. Now, I'm an atheist, but I was raised Catholic. I was overwhelmed with a sense of emotion by the magnificence of that building. The building was jammed with people from all over the world. I must have heard 15 different languages. People were there with their children. The noon mass was just coming to an end. There was such a sense of dignity and spirituality in that building. I did a full tour of the edges, looking at each of the various shrines, each one done in a different artistic style, from Renaissance to modernism. And there was such a sense of unity, of a global awareness in that building. And then went out onto the street and looked at the magnificent bronze doors. And I thought, this is fantastic. The symbols, the iconography of Catholicism, the ability to read the building, to understand the symbolism of the stained glass windows, and to recognize the various types, styles of art that I saw in it. That came from my public education, my public school education, and my state university education. And I thought again, my sense that there's something wrong with the way education is being conducted in the elite schools when feeling for reverence, the feeling for grandeur has been stripped away from the students, and instead there's a kind of negativity and a carping toward religion and toward belief. Belief is somehow considered ignorant or reactionary. And then I went on from there to the real goal of my walk, the Museum of Modern Art, which has just opened a Jackson Pollock retrospective, the first in something like 30 years. And this too, the museum was jammed with people, many different languages and multiple generations, people with children. The people with children were all from abroad. The people with children, French and Spanish, taking their children to see the art. I saw hardly any Americans with their children. And the feeling, once again, of being almost as in a church. Okay? This was not only the works of Pollock, a great avant-garde figure who literally shed his own blood, okay, for a style that was not successful for most of his career. This feeling of being in a church was reinforced by seeing, like a shrine, a reconstruction of his actual barn studio in the Museum of Modern Art, done with aged lumber brought from some barns they found someplace. And everyone walked in it with a kind of hush to see the space, the windows, the roof beams, everything. I thought, once again, the feeling of reverence for art and honor of the artist. That's not what you're getting on the elite college campuses these days, and it hasn't been for the last 30 years, not since the period of post-structuralism and postmodernism, where there is a political ideology to the artistic experience, where the student and teacher are expected to hold the red pen in hand and to go down the margin of a book going, check racism, check sexism, check homophobia, finding all the things wrong with the artwork. There's no longer a sense of the heroic. Now, it could be that my feeling of reverence for art is coming from being Italian. I know it is, because in Italy, you don't have these ridiculous ideas that high art belongs to an elite and is somehow foisted on the lower classes. On the contrary, in Italy, the great art belongs to the people. It's understood by the person who is plowing the field that the operas belong to him, that Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel belongs to him, etc. So we don't have this, all of these, to me, very pernicious and moralistic theories about art that have seeped into American higher education from the German and French schools, and have been really, they work best with texts on the page. They have very little to do with sensory experiences in the visual arts, those of painting, sculpture, dance, opera, and so on. At any rate, having visited those three buildings in such a short space of time, again, I thought, I want a primary and a secondary education that will prepare our students to be able to have the kind of experience that I had on that day, to be able to understand the history and the design of those buildings, and to feel at one with the people in them. Okay? Not a sense of false superiority that I'm afraid that students in the elite schools are trained to have. superiority. Somehow they alone have been shown the way by Foucault. Foucault has shown them the way. They alone, okay, are not a victim of any ideology. Everyone else, the hoi polloi out there, and it's kind of this Mandarin attitude of false superiority that people get who have been forced to read Lacan, Derrida, and Foucault. But it is pointless for me to continue to belabor Lacan and Derrida, who are quite dead, and it's only Foucault that I am continuing my attack on. So I feel that education is about meaning. You give the students meaning, and you help to organize meaning for them. In other words, my philosophy is the exact opposite of that of the elite professors, including those in the humanities departments at Harvard. They believe it's their mission to disabuse the students of any premises or assumptions they might have, and we're going to destroy their ability to just find meaning in anything. Everything is meaningless when you get done with it in the great porridge of post-structuralism. Now, that may have been an appropriate style in the 1960s when you were dealing with 1950s WASP conformism of the the Republican era in America, but the idea that students of the 1980s or 90s require their beliefs to be deconstructed by the professor, it is absolute folly, because the students are coming to college with nothing. They have nothing. They need something. It is the teacher's function to give the something. The problem is, I'm afraid, that the elite school professors are very much removed from the realities of American life. They talk only to each other. And then they have, of course, a conference circuit of other like-minded people at Duke, Berkeley, and so on. And they're on this endless kind of funhouse ride of only seeing mirror images of themselves everywhere. They never listen to anything beyond their own immediate circles. I myself, because of the disaster of my career, have had a wide range of teaching experiences. I am much more in tune with America. I try to, in fact, make efforts to remain outside of every coterie, every clique. I try to be surrounded with people who would disagree with me at all times. I had an enormous range of teaching experiences. From I have taught as an adjunct faculty, a visiting lecturer in the Ivy League, but I've taught in art schools, and I've taught in factories. I've taught working class students. I'm probably the only one of my competitors now in the culture wars, in the humanities faculties, who has actually been in a factory, okay, and know what the adult students of mixed race would like to hear. They certainly don't want to hear about the sufferings of Guatemalan peasants. They want to read Shakespeare. They want to hear about Sophocles. They're taking a course in their busy family work lives because they want high art to be open to them. Yes, high art. Okay, I believe in aesthetics. And aesthetics no longer exists. Oh, there are some philosophy courses that may teach aesthetics in a very dry way, yes. All right, but the aesthetics, any reference to the aesthetic is automatically considered to be somehow a tool of ideology. Now, slowly but surely, thanks to me, the subject of beauty is back on the agenda. All right? I've been forcing that issue on. My first success was in regard to the fashion magazines. Slowly, I pushed Lacanian feminism into the grave, okay, the anti-fashion bias of Lacanian feminism, and now a new generation of young women has risen up who don't find it inconsistent to wear lipstick and mesh stockings and also be interested in feminism. There was a time when, there was a requirement of dowdiness, of course, in the 70s and 80s, and that was the great period of Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin. But now, in the 1990s, the reform wing of feminism, of which I'm one of the figures, has made an enormous upsurge, and it's very clear that we have the momentum. People are no longer willing to use ideology to dictate to their relationships, sexual relationships or otherwise. And the fashion is back, and beauty, the sense of beauty has reemerged as a subject of study. I myself never lost that, partly from being Italian, but also from my influence by Oscar Wilde and Walter Pater, Gautier and Baudelaire. I'm very much in the tradition of the art for art's sake movement. At any rate, I feel that there has been too much ignoring on the part of the professors of the elite schools of public education. I think there has been utterly irresponsible, the deafening silence on the part of the humanities faculties about what was going wrong with public education in the last 30 years. It's an absolute disaster. If you teach in an elite school, your students are all going to be very polished, no matter where they come from. They've won the sweepstakes, okay, to get into the school. They all will have a pretty advanced sense of how to read and write and to produce essays. So I think that the elite school faculties have not realized the extent to which reading is dying. It is dying. The book is dying, even while the bookstores are thriving and the online book ordering services are thriving. Because of the students I have had in my long and ill-starred career, I have felt what has gone wrong in the high schools, and I have made a point of teaching freshmen for most of my career in order to feel that. I feel, when the freshmen coming into your classes are so unformed that you really can see what's missing. There is a disaster going on, I think, a cultural disaster because of the failures in primary education. The most important issue is certainly that of history. We cannot have an electorate which is as ill-educated about history as this one is. The sense of chronology is completely gone. In fact, the sense of chronology is completely missing from the humanities faculties, too, of the Ivy League. I mean, something that calls itself New Historicism, for example, is one of the worst offenders. I'm an old historicist. I believe that art must be understood in its historical context, and that's what I have done in my own work. And I think that the last person who was able to join a Marxist perspective to authentic aesthetic analysis of the history of culture was Arnold Hauser in his great The Social History of Art that was produced, released in 4 volumes paperback when I devoured it in graduate school. I think that was a truly learned man. He shows how it's possible indeed to keep everything going when you're discussing an artwork. New historicism, I think, is a disaster. It's a disaster to those who practice it. It's a disaster to those who read it. I encounter in the real world the products of Ivy League education. I can see the books coming out from Ivy League graduates, particularly the women who have been touched by the women's studies programs and so on. They're an absolute mess historically. The sense of chronology is completely gone. People have a frame of consciousness that's about 30 years long. Now, my sense of time is coming from my childhood passion for archaeology. I feel that, in my experience of experimenting with archaeology in the classroom, I feel that archaeology is a splendid tool in both the primary level and secondary level to help give students that sense of history that is so missing. Archaeology, the enormous sweep of time in it, and also the sense of the fragility of human institutions, and of the arrogance of power and of empires and how quickly they can fall to pieces. The examples of Egypt and Rome are great examples of it. The enormous sweep of archaeology, the way you're thinking in 1,000-year cycles, like geology also, which is my favorite science, that very long time frame, and possibly I have that time frame in terms of the sciences too, from being raised in upstate New York, which was sculpted by the glacier of the last ice age, which went through and has left so many marks in upstate New York that to travel through, to go from Endicott and Binghamton to Syracuse is to follow the path of geological events that occurred 10,000 years ago. Niagara Falls, for example, that great, one of the wonders of the world, is a remnant of the last ice age. And very near where my family lives in Syracuse, New York, is a dry escarpment, bigger in size, in fact, bigger than the Niagara Falls, that was another such waterfall, and nothing remains at all but a little glacial pool bottom bottomless at the very bottom, and so on. Now, the grandeur, in the sense of majesty that you get from contemplating nature, is also something very, very important, it seems to me, to develop students' sensibilities. That also is gone from the humanities programs of the elite schools. How did that happen? My generation of the 1960s is exactly the one that gave birth to the environmental movement. How did it happen that nature could be so totally edited out of the discourse of post-structuralism and postmodernism, right? So that I meet these products of Harvard or Berkeley or Duke whose minds are so narrow. They are so small because they've read nothing but Foucault and other, and the contemporary critics who are imitating Foucault and so on. So small in their minds, so impoverished in their imaginations. They have no feeling for nature whatever. They're blind. They're little blind gnomes. Now, even if you respect Foucault, which I do not because I don't believe that he was as learned as people think he was, even to respect him, all that Foucault ever dealt with was society, okay? And society is a very tiny part of the full spectrum of the universe. Human society is tiny. Isn't it obvious when you turn on the television, all it needs is one big hurricane to smash everything that's civilization? Nature is enormous and fascinating. It's huge. It gives you a sense of the metaphysical. Whether you believe, I don't believe in God, I believe in nature, the power of nature. That is another thing that we have to give to our students, okay? A sense of awe, what the poets used to call, and the artists used to call the sublime. A sense of the sublime. If you're not giving that to your students, if you're shutting them down and making them focus narrowly on little tiny fourth-rate contemporary critics, and you call that education, okay, that is an atrocity. What you're doing is you're stealing vision from the students, and you're crippling them. Their inner creativity will never develop, and that's what's been done to 2 generations now of graduate students. They may not realize it, but that's what's been done to them. Their original voices have been taken away from them. I just thank God for the education that I got. I thank God for the old-style public school education that believed in history, believed in drilling you with timelines, okay, drilled you to diagram sentences, showed you the structure of things, okay, gave you a sense of the importance of politics, inspired you with examples of heroism from the past. It wasn't just everybody was a rogue. Oh, this famous person was a rogue. Guess what? He beat his servants. It wasn't like that at all, okay? It gave you a sense of achievement, something to aspire to. If we don't help our young students to dream and to aspire to greatness, if you believe that even greatness is like a rhetorical game being played by heterosexist elitists sitting in a room someplace, okay, now what are we doing? The whole point of education is to open up the world of greatness, it seems to me, to the students. Greatness in politics, greatness in science, greatness in the arts. Now, science, my God, the way science has been demeaned by the humanities faculties of the elite schools, it is evil what has been done, okay, science. For example, the way women's studies was put together, and now, of course, it's evolving into gender studies, with science absent. Science was considered the enemy. This is how I got drummed out of the women's movement. There were 2 major quarrels I had with the women's movement, and no discussion was tolerated. I was driven right out of it. 2 arguments. One was about popular culture, my love of the Rolling Stones. I was driven right out that Rolling Stones were sexist. That was not to be tolerated. That was 1969. All right, and then 1974 over science, when the founding members of the Women's Studies program at the State University of New York at Albany said that science was all brainwashing and that hormones didn't exist. And so. And that I had been fooled, I had been hoodwinked, not to be there. And so here's how women's studies and gender studies went down the wrong road, and then it was reinforced by the anti-science bias of post-structuralism later on. Science should have been made the keystone of gender studies. First of all, no one should be credentialed at all to be discussing gender in a college classroom who has not made the requisite study of science. Now, I'm not saying you have to be a biological determinist. I'm just saying that if you're going to be a social constructionist, you better have studied endocrinology and evolutionary biology, and you better know your way around science. It is a mockery of scholarship, the way the women's studies programs were put together. It's going on and on and on. The leading gender theorists are rabid social constructionists. And I happen to know the educational backgrounds of several of the leading ones of them. And I can assure you it's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. We have these minor contemporary figures who are being packaged by PR and being paid enormous embezzlement level sums, okay, of salaries by the major institutions, all right, and are being foisted upon our students and using up their precious college time, when the whole point of primary and secondary education at this point should be about taking students into the great past. All right, the students are already immersed in the present. The present is around them. They are the mass media is their world. Now, I am a great supporter of pop. I am a Warholite. The domination of media. With the young happened to my generation. I love television and advertising, Hollywood movies, and so on. I feel quite at home with that. On the other hand, I had the advantage of this very, very strict, old-style public school education. Therefore, I have a sense of chronology and history, and I can play with one side of my mind with pop. Now we have two generations of young people whose world has been nothing but pop. Nothing but pop. And then they get to Harvard or they get to any of the other elite schools, and they're being encouraged to play postmodernist games with like cutting out sort of things and juxtaposing them and making, and the kind of tone that you're supposed to use, of course, with all of this is like a kind of cool whimsy and irony and aren't I clever and punning and so on and all of that. And it just completely cut off at the neck. And again, this kind of shallow irony being imposed on young people when they should be at their most passionate, all right, and when they should be being developed emotionally, it is atrocious what's being done. It's a form of child abuse, okay? Post-structuralism should be denounced, all right, for its child abuse. All right, now, let me go on to more controversial matters. In terms of primary education, now it's obvious that the ideal of universal literacy is fairly recent. It's really a dream of the American democracy. So this is something that we're still trying to hash out. What should education be? It's obvious that public school education for the immigrants, and for that long period, was a door into American society. And I look back at that period with some nostalgia. There were problems with it, okay, certainly, but at the same time, it seems to have produced disciplined minds in the young people who went through that system. In New York State, where I was raised, we had standardized state requirements. The Regents exams. They were like these enormous vampire bats sort of hanging over the teachers. And I never understood it at the time. But the teachers were always saying that the Regents exam is coming, the Regents exam is coming. And there was always this sense that the teachers knew that their own productivity was going to be judged by the schools in terms of how their students did on those exams. Now, I think that was a good idea. And I think we have to really, look again at standardized tests. Whether national standards will be intrusive into states' rights is an issue I think that needs full exploration. But the idea that we should not have tests and that teachers should not be judged by their ability to pass their students along to the next grade is ludicrous. Part of the problem is that the old public schools drew on woman power in a period when women had no other options available to them. Women could not rise in the managerial class in corporate America or in the political world. And so there were incredibly talented women, often unmarried, okay, who made school teaching their careers. So that was one thing that's gone now. All right, those women have gone on to achieve power in the world. But I remember the devotion and the labor of those women and the strictness that they had. That's another thing. The strictness in the classroom, which very shortly, because of my generation of the 1960s, became unfashionable. By the 1970s, when I had my first job at Bennington College, you see, the style was that people call you by your first name. The teacher, you sort of kick back, and it's kind of a seminar situation. Everything is you can go with the flow, et cetera, et cetera. That was a noble experiment in its own way. Okay, the idea that the students would be motivated on their own to find knowledge. That after all, knowledge, education is not about really inserting facts into people's heads. It's about finding the way to approach life and so on. That was a disaster. Okay, let's face it. That was a total flop. Okay, it might produce. It's a good way to produce artists. Okay, I think that people who are intending to go on in the art world and want to live, basically an impoverished life of rejection. Okay, that's a good way to do it. For the vast majority of students, all right, what I have seen is decade by decade a terrible decline in the knowledge of young people of the simplest things. And it's like a joke on the Leno and Letterman shows, for heaven's sakes. It's a joke how little people know on the street. Now, when I travel abroad, I'm even more struck because when I go to, now England has many problems that have to do with class, and I certainly don't want to present the British educational system as any kind of a model. But I'm often struck by the graduates of Oxford and Cambridge that I meet in my travels. I'm amazed at how much more sophisticated and cosmopolitan they are than the graduates of humanities programs of Harvard and Yale and Berkeley and Duke right now. They're way, way more worldly, and their sense of history is much sharper. We are geographically so isolated here in America that we must, it seems to me, take special care to make sure that our students have a sense of the world stage. And I think international politics is extremely important issue that must be stressed at the primary level before we even get to the college level. It's going to be a disaster, again, for this nation politically if our students don't have a sense of what is happening in the wider world. I think that you can tell just by listening to, let's say, the BBC News, okay, the BBC News Service, the radio news, how much broader the consciousness is of people who live in other parts of the world. We are, and now, of course, we are the joke of the world with our all absorption in these scandals of this year, ignoring every kind of complex developing political problem abroad. So I feel that at the primary level of school, we have to say our students are going to be citizens of the world, and every single student there, we must prepare, okay, for taking a place in that wider world. It's not just our political leaders we must prepare, but the electorate, because we've seen time and time again in history how a culture that seems to have attained power quickly disintegrated. Next, I think that in fairness to the most economically disadvantaged in our society, at the public school level, we have got to start stressing business, okay, small business management. We have to give them information about banking and the stock market, all kinds of things that come to members of the middle class and upper middle class from their families, but that people of the working class and lower middle class do not have any direct contact with. All right? We have got to start looking at primary education as partly, at least, vocational. It seems to me sustenance, which again education should be all about, is both spiritual and material. All right? And I feel that our education right now is failing on both grounds. Material, we have to prepare people to be able to make a living. Make a living in a world where you do not have necessarily, as in the old days, a lifetime job, where companies are suddenly absorbed into larger corporations, in which you may have to make a number of vocational changes over the space of your lifetime. So the vocational aspect of primary education that has been really abandoned, I think has to be recovered. There was a time when I was young, and it used to seem, just so terribly sort of corny once, and now I'm looking back at it, again with some nostalgia. There was a period where there was in Syracuse, New York, for example, the vocational or technical high school, where students who were not going to go on to college went to get actual training and skills. Now that should be an option to people who, to members of the working class or lower middle class. The tax dollars that their parents pay should be rooted to that kind of vocational training. It's absurd to have our education only tracking people for some college experience that is not even educational or substantive in its own way, and then it sort of throws young people out in the world without values, without facts, without anything. So the vocational opportunities, I think is an issue that needs to be brought back to the primary school level. So I feel that economics and business skills are very important. What's happened, you all know, to the inner cities is with the flight of the middle class to the suburbs, with the transition from the manufacturing economy that existed up until the end of World War II to the service sector economy of today, that we have more and more an isolated mass of young people in the inner cities who not only are unemployed, but have no contact with whatever with people who are actually going to work. They don't understand even the structure of going to work, getting ready for work, and the way you present yourself, even for a job interview. I mean, it is really a disaster what's happened in many parts of the inner city. Again, all these problems have been neglected by the insular elite schools, with all of their talk of racial tolerance and racial understanding and so on. And in point of fact, their obliviousness to the social facts of what is, of things degenerating in the inner cities. It's absolutely shocking. The public schools have physically degenerated in the inner cities. All right, it's disgusting what they look like. The overcrowding, the lack of resources, the lack of discipline, the dangers, and so on. All right, that to me, the true affirmative action is where the resources of a society are devoted to strong public education, especially in these inner cities where there are so many other social problems, which are overrun by drugs and every kind of danger. I'm very aware of these things because I teach in downtown Philadelphia, and my school, University of the Arts, is on the very borderline of what is, it's an avenue that's being created into an avenue of the arts by our Mayor Rendell, but it's right on the borderline of decaying parts of the city where it's impossible to ignore the lack of opportunities of these young people. And I myself, in my experience for the last 14 years at this university, have had contact with many talented African-American dancers and actors and so on, with tremendous artistic possibilities and so on. And I have seen in my own classroom, okay, how they have been defrauded of an adequate public school education. It is shocking, okay, what has been taken away from them that was given to the immigrant generations of my mother's era and also of my era. Okay, so I was so hopeful that the Clinton presidencies would solve these problems. Indeed, I think Clinton has been, for all the chaos in the White House, Clinton has brought the attention back to education, but he has not, his administration, being distracted by other matters, has not done the kind of work that needs to be done. This seems to me a social mission for everyone of the utmost urgency. Okay, we have abandoned several generations of inner city youth to these cesspools of those schools. Right? It is appalling. At any rate, I believe also that all kinds of social engineering ideas that seemed good on the surface were disastrous for American education. Busing, for example, which looked good on the surface and may have been positive in a few examples, I think tore apart too many communities, wasted resources on buses that should have been spent on the schools themselves. I think our infatuation with that particular strategy is waning. I also, from the moment I came on the public scene, spoke against bilingual education. That is, I feel that if my mother often says, when she came over here at the age of 6, if there had been bilingual education for Italians, she would have been rooted into an Italian-speaking class and would have lost the total immersion in English which she got. My mother speaks without an accent, got A's throughout school and so on. And look, her daughter is writing English. All these. You see, English is a very, very difficult language, one of the most difficult in the world. It's a very complex language with many levels because of the history of English. The the most noteworthy example of that being the fusion of the Anglo-Saxon monosyllables with the polysyllables from Greek and Latin that came in with the Norman invasion. And so what we have in English is multiple levels of diction. We might have 2, 3, 4 possibilities of words meaning roughly the same thing for a given context. And there's only one way you can ever master English, and that's by immersion in English, all right? And what people talk about bilingual education, oh, it's fine, the kids pick it up. Oh, they speak English fine. Sure, they speak English fine for what level of work, for what level of job, as you move along up the ladder until finally you're arguing a case before the Supreme Court and under pressure, okay? That's when you need this kind of pinpoint sense of the diction level of a particular word. I hear diction errors all the time. In fact, even native speakers of English, because of the lack of stress on basics in basic grammar in the primary schools and secondary education now too, are getting into the media, where I encounter them to my extreme displeasure when they're working as copy editors on my articles, let's say, even at places like the New York Times. This is why I know, okay, that Harvard education may look very pretty on the outside, but it is as a whited sepulcher, all right, let me tell you, to quote the Bible. I cannot believe the number of elite school graduates that I have had to deal with, continue to my pain, at major places, the Republic, all kinds of places, people who introduce grammar errors into my articles, all right? They don't have the simple mastery of English grammar. Why? How have these people managed to go through sometimes prep school education as well, and go through the elite schools and get jobs as copy editors? This is the best of the lot. Okay? This is and just the fogginess and the inability to write simple paragraphs and the lack of structure in their back. There's something terribly wrong with our educational system, and it's no good going on saying, "Oh no, it's everything's fabulous." It isn't fabulous. It's awful. All right, and the students, the recent graduates I meet also of the humanities programs, they're cowed, okay, in some strange way by their encounters with the tar baby of post-structuralism, okay, which is stuck to them. They're cowed, and they're nice, but they're melancholy, okay, and they're afraid. You know, they lack the sort of the big exuberant vitality of my generation, okay, who were trained with great works of art, okay, which enlarged us. Great works of art enlarge the soul. Okay, they enlarge you. They enlarge your imagination. And nothing great will ever be produced by people who are told that greatness doesn't exist. Okay, if you're told that greatness is just an ideological conspiracy, then you're never going to be inspired to spend 20 years of your life writing a 700-page book the way I did. Okay, I as a woman was trying to achieve something great. Okay, I thought it's about time women did something great like that. Okay, all right, about time, something big, something monumental. Write a book that goes from cave art to the Rolling Stones. That was my dream. Okay, and so on. We must, it seems to me, fire up students. Okay, not throw the cold douche of irony on them prematurely. Okay. Now, I'm still in primary education here. We haven't gotten out of that yet. All right. Okay. All right. Now, I believe, this is very unfashionable, I believe in facts. I believe there are facts. Every fact is certainly always in question, okay? And we should, be prepared to revise the facts as we understand them. But there are facts. Not everything is relative, for heaven's sakes, okay? I believe there are certain key facts that people should know, and that it's teachers' responsibility to decide what that core curriculum of facts should be. Teachers have had no guts. They are gutless wonders, all right? This cafeteria curriculum that has spread since the 1960s is absolutely disastrous. I have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, sort of a salad bar thing, a little bit of that, a little bit of that, a little bit of that, okay? End result, Nothing, okay? End result, big zero. Now, I've noticed how often people who understand my work, for example, which is very historical and has this long, big narrative sweep to it, which people have, which other of the postmodernists say that can't exist. No great narratives are possible anymore, really, okay? Look, I can think in these long narratives. I've noticed how often that the only people who understand my work, it seems, are often graduates of Columbia, the Columbia program in the history of ideas, all right, which trained very high-level history of ideas. And the University of Chicago also had a very similar thing to that. Now, I believe the core curriculum, where you determine who are the greatest thinkers, who are the greatest artists, and present those to the students in a chronological way to give people a sense of history, okay, and so on, not just all over the map in a kind of chic juxtaposition or collage, and so on, that is the proper way to teach. Now, obviously, I believe in canon revision, for heaven's sakes. I don't believe the canon is something immutable. In my own work, I for example, threw out Chaucer and Milton, and I put in the Marquis de Sade. Now, that was, I added him. I mean, so I know that we are always revising our idea of what is great. That should be obvious. At the same time, there are certain key texts which all educated people should know. And in my work also, I have argued that we do need to expand the curriculum outward in a scholarly multiculturalism that includes all of the great world traditions. I was the first to argue that world religions should be the basis of such a curriculum, and now that idea has been taken from me. I won't mention by whom, by people without credit, of course. At the time, I was scorned for that. Oh, religion! We don't want education everything to do with religions. But now, here at the end of this decade, it's starting to seem more and more attractive, because for me, the great world religions include architecture and art and the great texts of any given. We can't understand any culture till we know the religious background of that culture. And I believe that, as an atheist, that the world religions are great symbol systems that give you a sense of the vastness and mystery of the universe. And they are far more sustaining spiritually to students than Foucault. Okay, Foucault is a dead end. I keep telling you this, and I want you to go out there and tell everyone else about that. Okay. All right. Now, one of the reasons I love archaeology as something to introduce to the students at the primary level of education too is because it is a wonderful way to show the scientific method in operation. The scientific method, which again is scorned, okay, by the postmodernists. The archaeology is far more sophisticated a system than post-structuralism. For heaven's sakes, in archaeology, there are these fragments of evidence which you collect and you catalog and you try to make sense out of, right? And slowly, as you gather more evidence about a culture over years and decades, over a century, okay, you are constantly revising your hypotheses about those cultures, okay? And that whole process of an enormous amount of fact and of material objects treated with such care and reverence, right? It's not the period of brigandage and of looting. There have been such mishandling, obviously, of archaeological sites in the past, but that is not the majority at all of the archaeologists who have devoted their lives to this back-breaking work of collecting all of this stuff. It's a product, by the way, of the Western Enlightenment, so maligned by Foucault. Modern archaeology is this great system, okay, that was slowly developed after the Enlightenment. And that it was my original dream to be an archaeologist. I know a lot about it, and I'm enormously impressed with it. Again, far more complex a system, okay? The way you have a few fragments, a few broken pots, okay? A few remnants of charred logs, a heap of coins, and you slowly try to build in your mind, in the mind of the readers of the work you're publishing, some sense of what that culture was like. And your view of that culture in archaeology is also multi-layered, too. You are bringing together everything. And this is the great style of German philology that influenced me. You bring everything together, economics and history and art and religion and literature, everything at once, okay, to build this picture. And you are ready for your entire projected picture, your hypothesis, to be smashed, okay, by someone who comes after you who's had the benefit of further excavations, okay, further evidence, right? This wonderful history of archaeology over the last 100 100 years, where we have the expansion of our knowledge of the dynasties of Egypt and of and the recovery of things from the marine archaeology, we find trading ships that have gone down in a storm in the Eastern Mediterranean with a treasure house of goods on board, which by analyzing we can recreate the life of that particular culture. Now I notice that students love it. They love archaeology. It has a sense of mystery to it. It gives them history. They love the grandeur of the great monuments of Egypt. Egypt goes over great with anyone. I mean, I can't get this. The students want me to go on with Egypt. I go on with Egypt for years, okay? And they would stay within that. I think that is the direction we have to go in. We have to remove ideology from the classroom. I don't want ideology from the right, and I don't want it from the left, okay? I want all preachers out of the classroom, and I want facts presented, real facts, okay? Back to that. And timelines again. I do this in my classes. It seems so simplistic, but the students really need it. I just draw it, whatever course I'm teaching. I just draw a long timeline, okay? And I make these big blocks on it of 1,000-year periods, going all the way back to to the beginning of ancient Egypt, from Egypt to now. Like this, in other words, the beginning of the dynastic period in Egypt, 5,000 years. And I just fill in large, big things. Okay, here's the Renaissance. Okay, and here's the Greek period. Here's the Roman period. And they're like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Wow, okay. And then if I'm talking to them about anything, I mean, the Garden of Eden, you wouldn't believe, okay? Oh, that's what that's about. It's sort of like, I'm telling you, people at the elite schools have no idea, okay, of the way the bottom has dropped out of public school education, okay? This is a disaster. I feel I'm not a church-going at all, and I do not believe in God. However, I believe that the Bible is one of the richest sources of poetry and of myth and of wisdom in the world, okay, that it is the foundation of a lot of our literature and of our art, and that students who are raised without the Bible have no way to understand practically anything that they're seeing if they tour any of the great museums of Europe. They've lost the ability to interpret art. And I think that, again, art and the ability to respond to art aesthetically is one of the most sustaining things that teachers can give to their students, and that anything that makes students suspicious of art or negative toward art or ironic about art is a disaster to them, and again it defrauds them. It's a form of to me, it's evil. It is evil in the name of modern theories of chic posturing by the faculty themselves. Very basic things have been taken away from the students. My advice to the students is to, at least at the secondary level, is to take their education back from the faculty and simply to go to the library, okay, and realize that it's the library that is the great treasure house of knowledge at any institution. It survives the faculty. The faculty, thank God, is mortal. The library is immortal, except at Alexandria. There's only 15 minutes left. You need to go to Q&A. Oh, okay, all right. Kathy. Who is Kathy? Where is Kathy? Thank you, Kathy. All right. Now, wait a minute. Well, let me just quickly, all right, let me just do a quick thing then. All right, let me just, what did I leave out here? Oh, my God, there were so many things. In the old days, during the immigrant era, I've looked at these books in the public libraries. They're old books. They're often thrown out now, but there were these speech books, speech textbooks for speech classes in public schools during the immigrant era to help immigrants and their children, okay, to make their way in the world, to learn how to speak and to hold yourself and so on. I think these are basic tools of self-presentation, self-development that we need to reconsider again, particularly for the inner city schools. Again, the ways of how to rise in the world, how to you know, the ability to make verbal presentations is going to be a very, very important skill for students in their lifetime. So many of these things from the great period of public school education, I think we need to bring back out and dust off. Okay, wait a minute. Oh, I haven't gotten to secondary education yet. Oh, dear. Oh, wait, let me just go look very quickly here. All right, now, I certainly believe that in this age of mass media, that it should be required. Every student needs to take a course in the history of mass media to understand the way the modern technologies have developed and the way the culture around us, including the way we get information, has been managed, okay, by a host of sources which seem invisible and magical and mysterious to the young. So I think that's important. However, I do not believe that mass media should be taught with sterile and outmoded theories that descend from the Frankfurt School from before World War II. Why in the world would American teachers who live in the age of television or rock music impose German theories on people? I don't understand. We have our own pop culture theories coming out of Pauline Kael and Andy Warhol. There's an entire school of pop culture criticism. Parker Tyler, the gay critic, is my particular favorite critic of my movie. We've got to get rid of this stuff that dates from before World War II. It's just absolute nonsense. Now wait, what else here? Oh, now I believe that essay writing, okay, the kind of essay writing that's encouraged in prep schools and then at the elite schools encourages glibness in the students, and in fact is responsible for a lot of the grade inflation of the elite schools. It's unfashionable, you see, in the humanities classes for the last 35 years to test facts. Oh, there are no facts. It's just a matter of just putting them into some sort of a witty form. The wittier you are, the more you can sort of toss all these balls in the air, the better. I think we have to realize that literature is also about knowledge. And when we do that, bring our courses back to learning facts rather than just game playing and learning this kind of kind of superficial whimsy, I think the grades will fall, which I think is, I'm very happy to be able to give C's and D's at my school. Probably no one's ever seen a C or a D here. Do you know what that is? A C or a D? I don't know. Used to be there was a gentleman's C in the old days. All right, well, I'm just going to have to stop, okay? All right, because we are told there are to be questions. Now, who is going to lead this question? Are you going to lead this question period? Oh, you are? All right. Well, they look like a fairly docile crowd, and you never know. There could be a rabid post-structuralist among them. I'll leave it to you.
There are 4 microphones, 2 below and 2 above, and if you want to approach them, and please state your name and affiliation, and keep it short and keep it a question.
Hello,
Yes.
Ms. Paglia. My name is Gareth Driver. I'm a sophomore at the college, and proud to say I'm a graduate of Avoke Tech High School. My mother went to Harvard in the early 60s before they had the curriculum reforms. So she was required to take a survey course in the humanities. And when I told her that I was reading Plato's Republic in one of my classes, she asked me a couple questions about it. So I was trying to talk to her a little bit. And she wasn't really able to hold the conversation. So I asked her to look at the books she'd read for a class, and it turned out they were a 4-volume summary of philosophy from Plato to Hegel. And she hadn't really read the book, even though she knew.
Was that Radcliffe?
Yes, it was Radcliffe.
Oh, Radcliffe.
Yes.
Well, Radcliffe is isn't it dead now? I don't know.
She hadn't actually read the books, even though she knew the facts. So I wonder if there might be something more than facts that needs to be taught.
Well, I mean, I think people should be reading the original text of things and not summaries. I think that whoever signed, whatever teacher that was at fault. I don't know if that was. I don't want to defend Radcliffe in the early 1960s. I mean, it's just,
Thank you.
yeah. Oh.
Yeah, my name's Adam Sofan. I'm a sophomore at the college. I was interested in what you were saying about education about art in secondary schools. I mean, and I agree, the best course I've ever taken in high school or college was my senior art history course. But it seems to me like your whole sort of attack on the system today comes, you're attacking leftist critics and post-structuralists, obviously. But wouldn't you say there's equally a problem rooted in, for example, the right wing who's attacking the National Endowment for the Arts, for example?
Whoa,
Which, by and large, funds
okay, you're saying a lot of things there because
really
actually I have criticized the NEA for its, I mean, I've written extensively about it, actually. I think the NEA has behaved appallingly. It should have been the guardian of art in this country. It has made itself the servant of the worst kind of PC. And it really angers me because the money for the National Endowment should not have been going at big $40,000 clumps to individual artists. Even though I teach in art schools, I do not believe that. I believe that that money should have been going to supporting institutions that the public can go to, the museums, at community art centers, music lessons for inner city youth, keeping the classical music stations on the radio in the cities. Now, and you don't notice this in Boston. You have very good music here. Any real big college town is going to have good music stations. But in Philadelphia, which is a major music town, in the origin of a lot of all kinds of famous musicians in jazz and soul and rock and so on, classical music is necessary on the radio because people who are economically impoverished have no other access to it but that. And people who come from homes which, people who hear classical music playing at home, all right, have access to it, can afford $16 CDs and so on. It is tragic what's been done. Now, the NEA should have been supporting that. That's what it should have been supporting. Okay? So the NEA is a victim of its own foolishness, and I don't want to defend that for a minute. Now, however, I'm glad you mentioned the art history thing because too often in primary education in America, what art classes for young children are playtime. Okay, let's bring out your creativity. Have some play. You do it. That's not my idea of an art class, all right? You do it, okay? Look, I can paint this thing, all right? I want the students to know real art, especially in America, where we don't have a tradition of high art. Whereas in Europe, the young people see art all around them. Indeed, it's a burden to the people of Europe. It's too much. The burden of the past is very, very strong, which is why so many of us in America probably are more original because we don't feel the weight of all those antecedents on us. But everywhere, every building that you see in European cities in some way, its artistic experience is to be in its presence. We need to have art history at the very earliest grades. Now, this to me is also the way that you begin to build tolerance for gay people, all right? It's not by telling them, be nice to the gay people, okay, by having people come in and preach to you, in that very intrusive way that I think is disrespectful to people of other, who are very traditional in their religious beliefs. People who are Hindu or Muslim or Christian may believe homosexuality is a sin, and they have a perfect right to say that, and they should be allowed to say that. I'm saying this as a lesbian. They have a perfect right to say that anywhere, and they shouldn't be muzzled because of someone else's political ideology. The way that you build tolerance is by exposing young children to art, and slowly over time, as they learn about artists, this one was kind of odd. You don't have to say that they were gay, because sometimes they weren't gay, they were just odd, okay? They're odd. It's sort of like Michelangelo was gay, Leonardo was gay. They were odd. Now, if they had a sex life, probably they would have been gay, but don't tell me they were gay. Those guys were these crazed, monastic, isolated types. They had some pretty boys as apprentices, but just look at, I think, and so I feel that by the history of art, by showing the history of genius, which again is another one of those things that's out the window in the humanities departments. I happen to believe that there have been geniuses in history, in the sciences, and in the arts who have made enormous differences in our culture, enormous differences, powerful personalities. And the more powerful the personality, the more it's appealing to young people. So by showing the lives of the artists, now again, it's the Italians, okay, who are on the forefront of this. We are the first to apply the word genius, okay, to painters and sculptors who worked with their hands. Before that, poets and tragedians and people who wrote tragedies and so on had greater prestige. And Vasari's The Lives of the Artists, the idea that an artist's life should be cataloged, that he is a great man who should be honored. Again, this is one of the Italian contributions to the world. I think that this is, we've got to start exploring this. I feel art history, authentic art history also, there's so many nudes in the history of art, okay? That's another way to sneak it all in, okay? All right? I think it's another way to liberalize people's attitudes without preaching to them. Well, anyway, all right, I can go on about that.
Question up here.
Where's the person who's speaking? Oh, wait. Oh, my God.
Hi, how you doing?
L'enfant du paradis.
Give your name, please.
My name is Chris Hayes. I don't go here.
Oh, lucky you.
I was just wondering what's one specific, definite thing that legislators or school reformers can do right now, tomorrow, wake up and go into the office and do that you would recommend to make public schools better?
Well, number one, everyone, no, should not tolerate one more moment of the deplorable condition of the inner city schools. Right? Every time I see billions of dollars being sent abroad for foreign aid, every military junket that I see, every Tomahawk missile that I see being sent off for some reason as we're on some peacekeeping mission, makes my blood boil. Okay, when I think that these are tax dollars that should be going to these inner city kids, we have a very combustible social problem on our hands. I think that should be number one on the national agenda. I think the reclamation of physical reclamation of the inner cities and that restructuring of the public schools. I think that's number one.
Question up here.
My name is Robert Hughes. I'm a sophomore here. I'm a student in mathematics, and I was wondering, what do you think is the most important thing for a science or mathematics student to study in the humanities when you have a limited amount of time?
Okay, here we go. Now, this is the entire point. When people who are majoring in any of the other disciplines, in the sciences or in theory, they should be able to take one or two liberal arts courses that deal with great works of art that truly open their imaginations to what has been accomplished at the very top level in history of culture, and that's not what you're being offered today. I know it. When I've gone around to lecture at various schools, I get quite an earful, okay, from the undergraduates when I hear the stupid things that are being taught in the humanities courses at Princeton. God knows, I could go on about Princeton, what's happened to Princeton there, okay? There's an example of a humanities program destroyed by affirmative action that benefited white middle-class women, okay? That was like absolutely pirated by white middle-class women. It is appalling when I hear what is going on there. I'm just disgusted by it. So we have got to bring the humanities back to a sense of a core. We cannot allow these like little courses to be offered in these little areas just to feed the teachers' private research interests. There's an awful lot of exhibitionism going on the part of the humanities faculties, and it's because they want to increase their own value on the job market. It's become it's an incredible fast track to wealth and success, or it's no longer what it was in the 1980s. But your question really speaks to this, okay? It really speaks to this. It should be obvious, okay, to the people who are majoring in science or mathematics. It should be obvious which are the most substantive and most useful of the humanities courses. And when you enter those courses, again, I feel that the teacher should be a kind of evangelist for the humanities. Every humanities teacher should be a proponent of, an advocate of the humanities, all right? Not someone who's like, in this kind of posture of detachment and just world weariness and all-knowingness and so on. God, do I hate that. And what a betrayal of the 1960s that is. Because we in the 1960s, our big word was, wow. Well, that was, wow, far out. That was our big thing, okay? What happened? What happened to that? What happened to that? With the Seinfeld era, okay, of free-floating detachment. Oh, it drives me crazy. Anyway, I'm sorry that there is not an abundance of riches for you to choose from. Blame this institution.
We'll take two more questions. You sir. Right.
My name is Justin Porter. I'm a senior at the college. First, let me compliment you on making Harvard's most shocking rhetorician, Professor Mansfield, blush at least 3 times this evening.
You blushed?
Maybe 4. But I want to hark back to a response you gave a couple of seconds ago. A lot of your speech seems to reflect on Alan Bloom's Closing the American Mind. And I was wondering what your thoughts on music were, particularly popular music and how it affects kids in primary and secondary education.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Alan Bloom because I have just responded to a question on my, not on my Salon column on the internet, Ask Camille, but in the new section on education called Ivory Tower. Just tonight, it's going up online tonight. A person wrote in and asked me about Alan Bloom, and I responded at length. So that will be up on for tomorrow's edition, presumably. The Closing of the American Minds, when it came out in 1987, I think it is a major book in American letters. It's going to last. Bloom himself was treated outrageously, and I wonder whether in some way it didn't shorten his life. He died fairly young. I think he was 62, something like that, when he died in 1992. But it's not a book that I felt was particularly congenial to me. So much of it is an attack on my generation of the 1960s. He was born in 1930, and I certainly support his idea of a core curriculum. I think that he is quite right about that, that the faculties abandoned their responsibility when they said, well, we're unable to agree on what a core curriculum might be, and they threw everything to the winds. And there was a new kind of relativism on campus. But there's a kind of dour quality to his world that's not mine. I'm a product of the swinging 60s, particularly of London and Mary Quant and Rudy Gernrich and Warhol and the Rolling Stones and the Doors and Jimi Hendrix with all his flamboyance, et cetera, et cetera. So I look at this and I feel it's very constraining, the world that he sketches. Even though he does make some references to art, he is primarily a man of the book, of the word. He is a philosopher, and I am certainly, my PhD is in English literature and so on, but yet I'm very much dominated by images and by movies and by costume and all kinds of the choreography, dance, all kinds of things don't really get into his worldview. So I find his worldview a little bit too limiting. Now his attack on rock is very interesting, I think. For him, he feels that once you've listened to rock, you become incapable of ever appreciating classical music again. I don't believe that. I believe that I'm very eclectic in my musical tastes. I love classical music and I adore rock. Rock has been influencing me for 40 years. In fact, I teach a course at the University of the Arts that's just on song lyrics that was especially designed for the student musicians and composers. I find that very, very interesting to talk with students who are actually involved in this, writing their own music. How do you mesh word with music, and how do you shape a song and the architecture of a song and so on. So at any rate, I do feel, though, that that was a massive statement. Bloom's book was Alan Bloom's book. Now, Harold Bloom was my mentor. People always mix that up in Europe. They always think I was Alan Bloom's student. It was Harold Bloom who was my dissertation director. But I think that that's the most considerable of the statements, of the protests against the decline of the educational system. There's no doubt about it. It unfortunately did get caught up in what was going on politically in the Reagan presidencies when William Bennett was the Secretary of Education, Lynn Cheney was the chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and so on. So it got politicized, and the actual intellectual protest in it was somewhat overlooked by the very arrogant then high liberal faculty on the various campuses who just refused to listen to it. And now, I think that people need to go back to it and realize that there was wisdom and experience in that book. It's definitely a book of substance. Thank you for the question.
The last question, sir.
Yes, thank you. My name is Noam Weinstein. I'm also a senior like Justin. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what I hear you saying on the one hand is that you are rightfully very concerned about a fear to stick with facts and education and to cater to particular ideologies and attitudes. On the other hand, you're very concerned about a loss of mystery, reverence, and awe, and you feel like educational contexts are appropriate venues for the creation of those things. How do you reconcile those two?
Well, in my own work, in my book Sexual Personae, for example, I talk about the Apollonian and Dionysian principles, which Nietzsche talks about, but he did not invent. It came out of Plutarch, actually, writing about Delphi. I feel these are the two great elements in human life. The Apollonian is rigorous and orderly, is fact-based, and then the Dionysian is the mysterious part that's instinctual. And we must develop both those faculties in human beings. In my work, I draw on pagan precedents. I've tried to sweep away Judeo-Christianity as completely as I can and go all the way back to pagan ways of seeing the world. So yes, the Apollonian, which is the fact-based part, and then the Dionysian, which is the mystery of nature and the mystery of the universe. I think those two things are the two elements in each individual which education should develop. Thank you for that question. All right.